Hello, and welcome back to another Read Aloud with Mr. O'Connor. Now, the book we've picked for you today is a book called The Magic Seashell. And one of the reasons that we picked The Magic Seashell is because, as we've discussed, May is Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And The Magic Seashell features books, characters whose race identity is Pacific Islander, and also the author and illustrator have Pacific Islander racial identities, specifically that the author has ancestors from Samoa. So, that's one of the reasons we've chosen this book to read with you today. As always, before we begin, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to talk about a question that will help you better understand and connect to the characters. We're going to talk about the book's genre. And then today, I'm also going to preview for you what it is you're going to be doing at the end to extend your good reader thinking about this book. So, the good reader question that will help you connect to the characters is this. Have you ever been separated from people you care about? Have you ever been separated from people you care about? I'm going to tell you a story. One time when I was quite a bit younger, I went with my family to Disney World and I was too young and too short to go on a lot of the rides. So one of my family members, one of my parents would have to stay with me while everyone else got to go on the rides. I was separated from people I cared about in that instance. Now, I felt kind of disappointed because one, I didn't get to go on a ride with them, and two, I didn't get to have this experience that everybody else was having, so it was kind of a blue feeling. I want you to think about if you've ever been separated from people that you care about. What happened and how did you feel about it? If you're able, pause this video and talk to someone near you about have you ever been separated from people that you care about? Thanks for doing that. Thinking about that will help you better connect to the characters in this story, okay? And the genre of The Magic Seashell is fiction. We know that authors write fiction in order to tell us a story. They usually have characters and a setting. There's maybe a problem that gets solved. Sometimes they follow the somebody wanted but so then formula. So this book is a fiction story. Now, the last thing I wanted to do was show you and preview with you what it is you're going to be doing to extend your good reader thinking at the end of this book. Now, we've been talking about this tool a lot over the past few weeks, and remember that it's called, I say, you say, Venn diagram. Venn diagram. So after we've read The Magic Seashell and answered some good reader questions about it, you're going to complete a Venn diagram where you compare things that are the same and contrast things that are different, The Magic Seashell with any book of your choice. So as you're reading, I want you to be thinking about what is another book that sort of relates to The Magic Seashell, and what are things that you notice about The Magic Seashell that might help you complete your Venn diagram later. So, now that we've done all those things, let's check in on the front cover and begin. As I mentioned before, the title of this book is The Magic Seashell. And I noticed some things about the characters' identities, also being that I've read it before. I noticed that there are two characters here on the front cover, as well as a third, that's an animal. I noticed these two characters, their age identity is that they're both kids. I know that their race identity is Pacific Islander, and like I mentioned, that's also the race identity of the author and illustrator of this book. I actually wonder if the author and illustrator wrote Pacific Islander characters because they share that identity with them. I wonder if that was important to them. Okay, let's begin. The Magic Seashell by Macarita Urale and illustrated by Samuel Zachariah. Far away on a small island in the Pacific Ocean lived a lonely woman. Her name was Messina, which means moon. She ate seafood, wild fruit, berries, roots, and bulbs. She had lived on this island for so long, her memories of a life she'd had on another island were fading. I hear the author telling us something important, that this character, Messina, she used to live on a different island. I wonder how she ended up here on this island alone. She remembered a storm, the cries and screams as she fell out of a canoe into the plunging seas, the desperate voice of her husband calling her name. Wow, that sounds like a scary memory. She got separated from her family when she fell out of that canoe during a storm. Although Messina was lonely, she kept herself busy by tending her home, making baskets and mats from leaves, and looking after a small garden where she grew vegetables, herbs, and wild flowers. There was one thing on the island Messina loved to do. Each day, she walked along the beach and gathered what the tide had brought in. Among the driftwood were many seashells that had been washed ashore. She made them into beautiful ornaments and used them for bowls and spoons to eat with. She had bracelets and necklaces, wind chimes and wall hangings, and even shells and lovely borders around her garden. One day, Messina was very excited. She found a shell as she had never seen before. She hurried home to admire its beauty, holding it up to the sun to see the rainbow of colors on its surface. At night, she was delighted to see the moon's silvery reflection on it. Messina knew she had found a special shell. It stood out like a bright jewel among the others. She wove a band from the soft bark of a hibiscus tree, and she hung the shell around her neck. Although Messina made many other necklaces out of seashells, her moon shell necklace remained her favorite, and she wore it always. Alone on the small island, Messina had no one to talk to, so she sang to herself. She made up songs about her loneliness, the storm at sea, and the names of the people in her family and the village that she used to live in. The years passed, and Messina grew older. One night, a huge and terrible storm struck the island. There was only one place where she would be safe. Inland from the shore was a rocky hill covered with small caves, and in one of the caves she would find shelter. Quickly gathering a few of her belongings, Messina stumbled out of her hut. She gasped as the wind tore at her body. The sky was dark and ugly. The seas heaved and rolled. She fell often, her legs giving way, and at times she clung to the trunk of a tree as the wind threatened to throw her into the maelstrom. That means lots of wind. Her tears of fear mixed with the rain. After what seemed like hours, Messina arrived at the hill. She found a cave just large enough to snuggle into. Sobbing, she huddled in the cold before falling asleep, exhausted. She worked really hard to get herself safe into that cave. For 2 days, the storm raged, and the island was in darkness and turmoil. When she woke up, she reached for her moon necklace for comfort, but she felt nothing. Her beautiful moon shell was missing. She must have lost it in the storm. She cried out in despair. Not long after, on another island, far away, 2 children ran along a beach. The day was bright and clear, and they skipped along, kicking at the water. The little boy saw something in the sand and stopped. "Look, what's that, Messina?" he asked his sister. "Wow, I noticed something, that character, that young girl, has the same name as the old lonely woman on the island." The girl looked at where he pointed in front of them. "That's shiny," she cried. They ran forward and dropped to the sand, their small fingers quickly digging it out. "Oh, it's the most beautiful shell I've ever seen," cried little Messina. They held it to the sun and turned it round and round, admiring its beauty and shape. Then Messina put it to her ear to hear the sea, a smile on her face, only to jump up suddenly, throwing the shell from her. The illustrator showed us something really important. That shell that they found, that's the same one that Messina had on her island and had lost. Somehow it ended up on this other island. "Aye! The shell sings my name!" she cried in amazement. Her brother Fetu grabbed the shell. He put it to his ear, and his eyes too rounded in astonishment. "It's true, and it sings my name too," he said. The children exchanged fearful looks and ran back to the village. They saw their grandfather sitting on a mat in their hut, making bonefish hooks. "Grandfather, grandfather," they cried, and the old man looked up. "Look what we've found, a shell which sings our names," cried Fetu. The old man took the shell from his grandson, turning it over in his hand and frowning at its strangeness. Then he placed the shell to his ear, and tears came to his eyes. "Grandfather, what's wrong?" The children were confused. "Why are you crying?" "That's the voice of your grandmother," the old man replied, his voice soft and hushed. "Grandmother?" the children asked, more confused. "But she drowned at sea years ago when she fell out of your canoe," Fetu said. Old Fetu shook his head. "She must have survived the storm all those years on an island far from here. Quickly, we must make to the sea and search for her." Search means look. The excited old man called his family. The author has told us that these characters are that same family that Messina, the lonely woman on the island, was separated from years ago. And they have a plan. They're going to look for her and try to find her. Soon, nearly everyone in the village had gathered at old Fetu's tale. They were excited. Everyone was asking questions all at once, and no one was listening to anyone else. Old Fetu held up the shell. "Listen," he said. Everyone quieted, even the children and the pigs and the hens. And then they heard the songs the shell was singing, Messina's songs. People looked at each other in amazement, and then they cheered. "She's alive! She's alive!" they cried. Many canoes set sail that morning in search of Messina. The women and children gathered at the beach, shaking their heads in wonder as they waved and asked the god of the sea to bless the search. For days and nights the canoes sailed the ocean, their only guide, the seashell which old Fetu held in his hand. The further the canoes sailed from their island, the clearer and stronger the shell's song became. One morning, the old man awoke to find the shell silent. He looked out to sea, and he saw a small island in the distance. Old Fetu closed his eyes and made a silent prayer as he heard excited cries from the men. They're all wondering if that small island they see in the distance is where old Messina has been stranded. As the canoes neared the island, the men saw that a storm had passed over it recently. Trees had been knocked over to the ground, and plants were strewn and wrecked everywhere. At one end of the island, they saw the remains of a small hut near a stream. The poles stood lopsided, and on the ground were hundreds of shells. The men started talking excitedly. Then suddenly there was silence, for on the beach before the hut they saw a figure, motionless. That means not moving. Old Fetu stood still, and no one spoke. Slowly, Messina turned her head. She had caught a glint of something shiny in the hand of the figure at the front of the canoe, the figure of a man with a face which tugged at her memory. That means he looked familiar. Her eyes moved from the shiny object to the man's face. She looked into the eyes of her husband. In his hand, he held her moonshell. The sea breeze broke the distance between them, and she heard its fading songs. They were her songs, her words, her music that had filled her lonely life. The magic seashell had held on to her songs and carried it back to her family. Old Fetu stepped forward while the men looked on in silent wonder. Messina reached out and touched the familiar smoothness of her moonshell, and then her husband's hand. The couple collapsed on the sand and wept. Later, she greeted and held her sons and kinsmen. Before the fleet of canoes left for home, Messina gently laid her seashell, now silent, in the sand. Its cone glittered in the sun as the canoes sailed from the island's shores. And that, my friends, is the end of the story. My good reader question for you today is this. Why do you think grandmother Messina, why did she leave the magic seashell on her lonely island at the end? Why did she leave it there instead of bringing it with her? Why do you think she did that? Remember that a good reader will answer that question using evidence from the text. What will sound like grandmother Messina left the seashell because, and I know that when the author wrote or the illustrator drew. If you're able, pause this and discuss with someone near you your answer to the question, why did grandmother Messina leave the magic seashell on her lonely island? Thanks for doing that. I think she left her seashell because its job was to bring her family back to her, and it had done that job already. And I know that because the author wrote, when they first found the seashell, that it carried the songs that lonely Messina or grandmother Messina had sang into it. So I know that that was its job. Its purpose was to bring grandmother Messina's family back to her. And so I think she thought, I didn't need this anymore. It's done what it's supposed to do. I wonder what you thought. Now, the last thing I'm going to ask you to do today is to complete a Venn diagram where you compare things that are the same and contrast things that are different between the magic seashell and another book or story of your choosing. And you can choose any story you want as long as you can make the connections, the comparisons, and the contrasts and complete a Venn diagram. To help you do that, I thought it would be important for us to make sure that we knew all the important parts of the fiction story, The Magic Seashell, that we just read, which means we need to think about what were the characters, what was the problem, and how to get solved, because that will help you think of which book you can compare and contrast it to. So, I went ahead and made a poster for that. The characters, or the main characters in The Magic Seashell, were Messina the grandmother, Messina the girl, old Fetu, and Fetu the boy. And we know a little bit about their identities. We know that grandmother Messina was a woman. She got separated from her family. She was lonely. We know that younger Messina was a girl, that she's the one who finds the shell. We know that old Fetu was a man, and that he's the one who looks for Messina. And we know that young Fetu was a boy. We also know that all the characters are Pacific Islander. We know the problem of the story is that Messina is separated from her family and lost on an island by herself. And that they solve this problem because the magic seashell tells Messina's family where she is, and then they find her. So hopefully, going over those components of the story will help you think of the just right book or story for you to compare and contrast as you finish your Venn diagram. Can't wait to see what your reader brain comes up with.